Hey, welcome back to the channel. Are you new to fountain pens or new to writing with extra fine nibs? Are you confused with what that means and how it compares to other sizes? In this video, I'm going to do a comparison of 15 different nibs, but across brands and materials to show them side by side. Let's take a look. Fountain pens come in different sizes of nibs to account for different writing styles, different writing needs, and personal preference. Now, fountain pens in general come from the sizes of extra fine up through broad when it comes to nib size. Some companies go outside of this normal scale and add in things like a double broad or an oblique, but that's for a different video. There's also the world of specialty nib grinds where a nib meister can take a broad nib and turn it into a needlepoint, but that's also outside of the scope of this video today. So in the world of fountain pens, the size scale is a general understanding to have a comparison across different brands or makers to know how that pen should write, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. A Japanese-made nib will write smaller than its German counterpart equivalent, but you'll see that when we get to the writing samples later on in this video. While extra fine nibs deliver a small, precise writing experience in general, this can really be affected by the ink or paper that you're using with a nib. Now, extra fine nibs in general do not suffer the effects of feathering as much as a larger nib, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. Okay, so let's get into the actual pens and nibs and talk through all the 15 different options that I have for this video today. I'm going to start out by talking about one of the most common nibs that you'll find. This is the Jowo number 6. Jowo nibs are used across various pen brands on certain models, including Opus 88, Esterbrook, Franklin Christoph, TWSBI, and Kaweco. These nibs are also commonly used by many smaller independent pen makers due to their consistency and easy availability. Jowo also has a smaller number 5 nib, which aside from the physical size of the nib, the rest of the information applies in the same way. The other common nib that is used in a similar manner to the Jowo nibs is the Bock Extra Fine. These are German-produced nibs and are used in some of the models of Asvine, Pelikan, Monte Grappa, TWSBI, Diplomat, and others. Bock nibs are also the preferred nibs for some of the independent makers similar to Jowo. While both of these nibs are used across brands, most of these companies do their own in-house tuning before they send the nibs out to customize them to how they want their pens to perform. Next up on the list is the TWSBI Extra Fine. Made in-house in Taiwan, these steel nibs are used in their Eco, Diamond 580, VAC 700, and others. TWSBI nibs are known for a smooth writing experience, and the one that I have does live up to that reputation. Another mainstay extra fine nib is the Lamy steel nib. This is a German-made nib, so it has similar properties to the Jowo or the Bock. These are found on the Safari, All-Star, Vista, Next, CP1, Pico, and some of the Studio models. These are very common and easy to swap out for different nib sizes or finishes. Lamy also produces the 14 karat gold nib that I have in my Lamy 2000. These nibs are known for having a sweet spot, and once you find it, the line is nice and consistent. Both my extra fine Lamy 2000 nibs lay down a great line, but with this being a German nib, it is wider in comparison to most of the other nibs you'll see in this video. The next extra fine nib that I have today is the Platinum Desk Pen. Desk pens are not all that common anymore, and this is a relatively inexpensive option, and it's a nice change of pace. These nibs are a number 5 stainless steel nib with a gold finish for design aesthetic. These pens lay down an extremely fine line, with this being a Japanese extra fine nib. I've seen some reviews of this pen online that say it is scratchy, but I believe that comes from a viewpoint of someone who's not necessarily used to writing with extra fine nibs overall. Staying within the Platinum brand, the next pen I have is the Platinum 3776 with the Ultra Extra Fine 14 karat gold nib. This nib is probably the finest nib of all of the pens, and it does have a great sound on the paper when writing with it as well. Up next is the Sailor 21 karat Extra Fine nib on my 1911 Black Luster. Sailor nibs are known for their performance and they live up to their reputation. This nib lays down a nice consistent line and it also has a wonderful sound as the nib glides across the paper. This is a Japanese nib, so it's one of the finer lines in the collection. Asvine Extra Fine steel nibs are up next. These are Chinese-made nibs and are commonly found in the Asvine, Jinhao, Bauer, and Pen BBS in some of their models of their pens. These nibs are widely appreciated for their smoothness, consistency, and value, making them a common choice in a base model or affordable fountain pen. Moving on to the Pelikan brand, I have one of their Pelikan Steel Extra Fine Nibs. These are used in their more budget-friendly lines, an example of which might be the M200, the Twist, or the Stola 3. These are nice steel nibs that do match up with the overall price point of these particular Pelikan models. The higher-end Pelikan pens use either 14 karat or 18 karat gold nibs. Some of these nibs are single tone and some are dual tone with the white and yellow gold mixed together. The gold nibs are different sizes for the different models of the pens. I have an M600 with a 14 karat gold nib and an M805 with an 18 karat gold nib that I'll include in the writing samples. I don't own an M1000, but that nib is quite a bit larger when you see them side by side. To round out the rest of the nibs, I have a few pilot pens to talk about. Up first is the Vanishing Extra Fine Nib. This is an 18 karat nib, and with this being a click fountain pen, the nib unit itself is extremely small. Due to that small size, it can come across as scratchy when writing at times. Now for these last two nibs that I have to talk about, they're not actually marked as extra fine nibs. This is the gold nibs on the Pilot Custom 823 and the Pilot Custom 92. These nibs are marked as fine nibs, but when writing with them, their line widths and performance write as an extra fine nib. Like I mentioned earlier, Japanese nibs are one size smaller than their German equivalents, and it really shows through on these particular pens. So before I get on to the writing samples, drop a comment below and let me know, are you an extra fine nib user? Do you own any of these nibs that I'm talking about so far? I'd love to know what you're writing with, or if you're curious and have any questions, leave those in the comments below as well. Now let's get on to the writing comparisons. Okay, so I've done a lot of writing to show is hopefully the best comparison that I can. So starting from left to right, we have Rhodia tab, Nimacine, a Lockbee with Tomo River, and a Hobonichi Weeks. So I started by using an Odo 0.5mm roller ball as kind of a base comparison to show the different writing, to have a baseline to compare against. So I'm going to do some zoom in shots that I'll overlay as I'm talking through this just so you can see, but I'm going to start by giving the overview. So starting off, I did the Jowo number 6 first, then the Jowo number 5, the Bock, TWSBI, the Lamy Steel, the Lamy Gold, the Platinum Desk Pen, which is steel, the Platinum Gold Nib, the Sailor Gold, the Asvine Steel, Pelikan Steel, Pelikan M600 Gold, Pelikan M805 Gold, Pilot Vanishing Point Gold, Pilot 823 Gold, and Pilot 92 Gold. So overall, you can see some noticeable things that jump out. The broadest nib across all four papers is the M600 Gold, which is an extra fine nib, but it's a really wet extra fine nib. That's a Roshizuku Cyan Go in it, the new color that was just released. And below it, the M805 is also a Roshizuku. It's the Murasashi Shikibu, I believe. And you can see the difference there. Same brand, same size nib, and how different they write. Now, the Pelikan 805 nib is even larger, so that's even more of a, contradiction that you would assume the bigger nib would write bigger, but that's not the case. So, showing on the various papers here, the Rhodia has a nice, it's a baseline. It's kind of a all-around go-to paper. And The Nimacine, all of the lines look thinner on there. It's a really absorbent paper. It's a kind of a slick texture if you've not used it, but all of the lines look thinner on that compared to the other papers overall. The Hobonichi is the opposite. All of the lines are thicker there for the most part because it's such a thin paper. It has a little bit more bleeding and feathering that you don't see on the other papers, especially like on the Lamy Gold nib from the Lamy 2000. If you compare the Nimacine and the Hobonichi, you can see an obvious difference there. So overall, this is where I referenced earlier that paper can make a big difference as well as ink. You can really see that in these side-by-side examples. And I believe the Hobonichi Weeks is also Tomoe River, so you can see the thinner Tomoe here versus the 68 gram on the Lockbee, how different the nibs write in comparison. Some of them stand out. I've mentioned the Lamy 2000 Gold. The Sailor Gold, which is that 21 karat nib, it is much thinner on the thicker paper. The Pelikan steel nib, you really see the difference there. So, and then the Vanishing points, the Pilot inks, all of those are extremely fine nibs, and they all look about a size larger on the Hobonichi paper. So overall, this is an interesting side-by-side comparison. I tried to line them up as best I could with 4 papers without ripping pages out of books and whatnot. And I'll overlay some close-ups of these various papers and put a little card up that says which paper it is. And I'll also do what inks. Most of these are Roshizuku inks, a couple of diamine, and a couple of Colorverse from the calendars. But I'll do a card and also put it in the description of what ink was in each pen for these writing samples. Okay, so that was a lot of writing samples. Thanks for sticking around to see through the end. So in summary, I hope this video was helpful for you to see the difference between various extra fine nibs across different makers and see how they perform in a head-by-head comparison. Leave me a comment below and let me know if there's any questions that you have further, if you'd like to know any more about any of the pins that you saw in this video. Be sure and stick around, and if you're new here, consider subscribing so you can see future videos as they're released. Thanks for watching.